welcome everyone. Welcome back to another Cosmic Cuppa with Jude on our wonderful platform 5D and beyond. I'd love to introduce you to Dr. Kathy Forti, an amazing woman with some incredible stories. And welcome, Kathy.
Well, thank you, Jude. You know you're a whole day ahead of me here in Maui, Hawaii. But it's close to the same time, just a day later, a day earlier.
So we're talking from your future, Kathy. How's that?
That's right.
So, Kathy, I would love to read your bio, and then I'll tell people how I met you, and then we'll get onto some lovely questions.
All right, sounds wonderful.
Thanks, Kathy. So, Dr. Kathy Forti, Ph.D., is the author of the newly released Trilogy Book Series, Stacks, Library of Truth, and Stacks, Awakening Truth. With Book 3, Stacks, Truth Will Set You Free, which I imagine has been released by now, Kathy, as well. Prior to penning her novels, she was a clinical psychologist with over 30 years of experience in the mental health field. Her knowledge of psychopathology adds unusual character and depth to her stories. As a direct result of her own near-death experience in 2003, where her heart stopped, Kathy became more creative. This led to the development of the Trinfinity8 and Ascension11 energetic software technology, now used by holistic practitioners worldwide. With a degree in broadcast journalism, she worked for several years as a researcher and field producer for CBS-TV New York. She also wrote a TV pilot script for Stacks that won a Slamdance Teleplay Award. Well done. She has authored a non-fiction book as well, Fractals of God, a psychologist's near-death experience and journeys into the mystical, and a children's book series, Freddie Brenner's Mystical Adventures. Kathy addresses subjects related to health, consciousness, spirituality, and the weird and wonderful. For years, she has been leading ancient mystery school groups to Egypt, having explored the water tunnels underneath the Great Pyramid, as well as closed-off tunnels under the Sphinx. Sometimes referred to as a female Indiana Jones, after finding alien artifacts in Mexico, which is pretty amazing, she is at heart an ancient explorer of the origins of humanity. Kathy was born in Chicago and has called many cities her home, including New York City, Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Kansas. You ain't there anymore, girl.
No, that's right.
Arizona. She currently resides in Maui, Hawaii. So, Kathy, that is an incredible bio, and I'd love to start by telling everyone how we met. I had heard about the Trinfinity8 device, and I'm an energy practitioner. I use Universal Life Force, but I love gadgets and I love frequency machines because I think that's one of the major ways forward in healing. So I bought one of these beautiful devices. And then I was hearing from Kathy about how these devices were playing out, how people were getting on with them. And she'd sent me this email saying, by the way, I'm taking a group to Egypt end of this year. Now, I should say prior to that, in 2019, I was getting what I call a titchy feeling, which is usually when I'm meant to be doing something or going somewhere, but I didn't know what it was I was meant to be doing. And I work very closely with spirit. So I'm saying, you're going to have to give me some help here. I don't quite know what it is. And I was thinking, well, maybe in 2020, I'm meant to be going to Portugal or Turkey or somewhere. And I was looking at cruises up the Rhine and all sorts of things. And I thought, no, nothing felt right. And then I got Kathy's email. Well, all the hairs on my arm stood on end. And it's like, this is it. This is where I'm meant to be going. So that's where I physically met this wonderful, wonderful lady. So, Kathy, I'd like to start, if I may, by asking you, what was life like for you as a child? And when did you realize you had more awareness than some?
Well, I have to go back to, I think I was around 10 at the time. And, not thinking about that, actually, it was a pretty profound thought, but I kept wondering if there was anyone else in the world that was experiencing what I was experiencing at that very moment, and if there was a parallel Kathy on the earth. And, it's sort of like, you go back and said, well, you're thinking about parallel lives. I mean, many years later, I thought about that. And I thought that was actually pretty profound. But I kind of came in knowing that there was something I had to do. I didn't know what it was. And, later in life, I thought it was just to be a good therapist. But when I was 18 years old, I was involved in the theater world in Chicago. And I was leaving from a rehearsal that night and going towards my car. And this is downtown Chicago. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Chicago or so forth like that. And, I was kind of in my own little la-la world and so forth. And I didn't realize that there was somebody behind me. And what happened was it turned into a physical sexual assault at the age of 18. And I was certain that I was going to die in that, because I had a knife against my throat and he planned on using it. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to see my parents again. I'm never going to see my brother and sister. And, there was that moment of anguish, of emotional anguish that started to rise up in me. And before I got overly emotional, all of a sudden a movie screen opened in my head. And I saw myself in the future. And I saw myself as an older woman. And I was sitting in a black Chinese lacquered rocking chair. And I was reading a children's book to two faceless looking children. And I could see the whole room around, that there was antiques, there was the color of the walls, the decor. It was all very specific. And I knew in that moment I was going to survive this attack. And I was going, and just as that rising emotion came up, all of a sudden I calmed down. And I think that's what saved me. And I was able to get out of the situation after he was done. And years later, when I lived in New York City and I walked into the house of someone I knew who I would later marry, there was the black Chinese lacquered rocking chair. There was the antiques. And I wrote the children's book during that time that I knew him. And I mean, we're no longer together. He's deceased. But what I did is I tapped into a possible future. And that's all I needed to know. Somebody was watching over me and said, we can't have her go crazy right now because it could turn a different way. And I think that was kind of an opening for me. And then a number of years later in my 20s, late 20s, and this is still before my near-death experience, I found myself on a spaceship. And I hadn't been reading about spaceships, or, I wasn't watching Star Trek or any of those things. And I found myself on a really huge spaceship. And apparently I was talking to the commander of the spaceship. I don't know his name or anything like that. I remember he was a very humanoid looking being and tall. And we were conversing as if we knew each other. And it was like, haven't seen you in a long time kind of thing, you know? And he was telling me about his mission. Now, this is way before the time of Bluetooth, you know, for our devices. And I remember people on the ship had a little kind of gold band inserted in their ears, not like an earring or anything, but kind of that. And that was the way they communicated on board. Everything on board ship went through that. So they were one with the ship. And he was telling me about his mission. But when I woke up, I had that part of it wiped out of my memory. But as we said goodbye, there was this exchange of energy that was so profound that I woke up in my physical body and my whole body was shaking. And it was almost orgasmic shaking. And I often wondered who that commander was. Later, I had the feeling that it was an Arcturian ship. And years later, when I did a Contact in the Desert with Dr. Stephen Greer, who does the Disclosure Project and everything else, we were in the desert with maybe about 15 other people late at night doing remote viewing and contact and so forth. And it was the first night, and we're all in our zero gravity chairs, you know, in the dark, you know, and all of a sudden he was doing this meditation with us, and all of a sudden he stops and he goes, "Oh my goodness." He said, "There's a Galactic Federation ship commander here. I've only seen him once before. He's very tall, and he's standing next to whoever." He said, there was a girl on his right side. He said, "Who's ever between her and the next person," which was me. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't know if it was my commander, you know. And so I asked for a sign that night. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and the whole room was filled with streams of light that were pouring into my heart. And I mean, it was the most heartfelt experience I've ever felt. It was a flooding experience of like love and light. And I knew in that moment that that was the commander I had read many, many years ago. And I figured that wherever I'm from, I've had people tell me, like, I don't know if you've ever heard of the trance medium or the medium, James von Prague. And yes, he's worldwide known over here, especially, you know, many movie series and television series have been done about him. And he speaks all over the world, and he speaks with the dead. And he doesn't usually give readings, but we were on board a ship in Australia once with a whole bunch of psychics. And suddenly he said, he told me, he goes, "Oh, this is really interesting." He said, "They're showing me you're from the Melchizedek energy." He says, "I don't know what that means." He says, "You're going to have to look that up." And he says, "You're also alien." And he started laughing. He goes, "Kathy, I always thought you were an alien." Well, we're all aliens. But I figured that, you know, it was kind of felt like when I had my near-death experience, I knew that I wasn't supposed to go into the light, and that they stopped me before I could do that. And because I knew that if I went into the light, you know, there's a possibility I might not come back, but I would also get caught in third dimensional Earth reincarnation. So and I always knew that after this lifetime, I wouldn't be coming back to this dimension.
Isn't it interesting that a lot of these things happen from a child? It's like you've made yourself a mission to come in to do something important. And a lot of these things happen from a very young age, whether we remember them or not. So that's right. Fascinating, Kathy. And to have that confirmation of a commander that you had met when you were younger by Stephen Greer. Yeah.
Yes. You know, it's like, yes, that was my commander. So, you know, it's sort of like, I feel like whatever it is, I'm going back to that commander or that whoever those are. And I've always, you know, I kind of feel like that they said I wasn't going to be going back to the fifth dimension. They said, you're more comfortable in the sixth, which I think a lot of people from the fifth will be moving to the sixth once a lot of the people from this dimension move into into the fifth dimension, there looks to be like there's going to be issues there as well in a massive influx of souls and them, it's sort of like I figure now we have a lot of old souls here that have gotten really kind of comfortable and complacent, you might say, living in third dimensional Earth. And I think that they're looking around and saying, this doesn't look so good anymore here. It's like there's a lot of things going on that I don't quite agree with anymore. And maybe it's time to move on once I die to another dimension, where I might feel that more like-minded and not all of the combativeness, or the emotional roller coaster ride of this particular dimension. Yeah, it's a tough dimension.
Very, very tough. We can learn a lot within a short time here, but it is a very, very tough one to be in when we're not used to this frequency and this energy.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I wonder if you would like to speak about your time as a clinical psychologist and experience in the mental health field. How was that for you, Kathy?
Well, they just don't teach you what you need to learn in graduate school. Let me just put it that way. Everything is learned on the job. And, even though I say jokingly, I was born in the sign of Scorpio in the planet weird, the clients that started to come to me as I just got out of graduate school were even more strange. I mean, eventually down the line, I went and had my own private practice, but starting out, I started out in community mental health, which is where you really learn a lot of a wide range of psychopathology. And I remember one of my very first clients, she came to me, or she was assigned to me, and she had a file that was about 3 or 4 inches thick. And I'd never seen that before. And she had just about every diagnosis known to man in it. Nobody had ever figured her out. She had gone from many, many, many therapists. And, I figured, okay, well, I don't know how I'm going to be able to help this person. Here I am, a really newbie on the block. But something happened right away. And as I'm talking to her, I felt a shift in energy. And I noticed that she was looking at the children's toys I had in the corner, and a little bit too much for an adult to be, because she was about my age at the time. And, but there was just something that didn't quite feel right. And I just came out of my mouth, "Hi, my name is Kathy. What's yours?" And it was like she had been caught. I mean, I knew what her name was according to the file, but I figured whoever was there in my room right now was not the lady, name that was on the client case file. And it was a child that was probably around 6 years old, and did not want to speak, but I could see her as soon as she was caught. She allowed herself to get into her child mannerisms. And I just said, "Would you like to go over in the corner? Well, we'll play dolls, or we'll play house or blocks or whatever I had in the drawer, and so forth." And that began a relationship where I had this client, and then I would get others like it. She was multiple personality disorder. That's what it was called back then. It's called dissociative identity now. She had well over about 150 alters.
Oh, really? Oh, my goodness.
Some were just fragments. Some were full-blown alters. And she had been severely abused by multiple family members. I mean, it's like she grew up in the swamps, the backwoods, a deliverance type thing. And she from an infant on. And so her personality, the personality is really set down between up until the age of 7. It's cemented, it solidifies. And if there's any severe abuse before that time, that's really chronic and ongoing, the ego will split off in order to protect itself.
And compartmentalize.
Yes, like it happened to somebody else, it didn't happen to me. And sometimes it could be just one memory, or it could be a smell or something that is, as like I said, sometimes it's fragments and sometimes you have full-blown host and alter personalities. And so, I mean, she probably, of all the clients I had, taught me the most. And, she was like a walking DSM, back then it was DSM-4, diagnostic and statistical manual of every single type of, whether it be, bipolar, whether it be dissociative, whether it be substance abuse and so forth like that. So I got to learn how to treat them all. And as some of her personalities were male, some were more female, some were little children, some were adults, some were left-handed, some were right-handed, some spoke a different language because they were out during that time that maybe they may have been visiting in Mexico or something like that. And even some of them, when they were children, even though she was in an adult body, they would need to stand on a chair to see themselves in the mirror because they thought that they were small. And so I think that what that was the most unusual thing was that this client, when she went to the OBGYN to have a gynecological exam, the doctor let me know in advance that he wasn't going to see her unless I was there. Now, this is something I usually didn't do for any clients go to their OBGYN, but what had happened in a prior examination is a child alter came out and thought they were being sexually abused. And of course, started screaming and crying, and it wasn't good for people sitting in the waiting room and certainly not for the doctor. And so what we would do is we would make sure all the little child alters were in a safe spot, safe inside the system, and only 1 or 2 of the adult alters would be out for the examination. So when she was being examined, one alter showed all the signs of cervical cancer. When the other adult alter was out, there was no cervical cancer. And they reran the tests.
Is this physically in her body?
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
So it kind of tells you about the mind and the power, how we compartmentalize things. I mean, the doctor was scratching his head. I was kind of scratching my head and saying, well, how can that be? And he says, I've run the test 3 times. And this is what happens. And, and over the years, she had many forms of cancer, and she beat all of them. She was in test programs where everybody else died, but she didn't. The doctors kind of were actually kind of angry at her because she defied, everything that they were trying to do. And she was a prayer warrior as well. She would pray herself right out of whatever cancer was. So I tell you, she had at least about 7 different types of cancers.
So the bottom line is, were you able to remove those alters or integrate rather than leave her in the state she was in?
Yes. Well, we got it down to about 15 alters. Now, sometimes you can never get it down to 1, that's pretty good. And I saw her over a long period of my therapy career. And I saw her pro bono because I couldn't take her, and she didn't have insurance. She had Medicaid, and at the time I didn't take Medicaid. And, you can't just see that client usually I saw her twice a week. And so I figured, whatever, it felt like it was some type of contract we had made, soul contract. And I figured, okay. And it was also a good learning opportunity. Well, there was at one time, it was getting close to she came into my office, and all of a sudden, sometimes it would be a fluttering of the eye with the changing of the personalities. And or I could feel the energy change. And all of a sudden, an altar came out, or something came out that I had never seen before. It was a being talking in these and thous, like biblical these and thous.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, like, excuse the expression, who the hell is this? I've never seen this one before. And I've mapped out all her her altars over the years, and when we integrated or so forth. And then this being that talked in these and thous identified itself as being outside of her mental system, that it was an angel.
Wow.
And this being then proceeded to tell me things about myself that my client had no knowledge of, very personal things. And the angel said, we're coming through right now because you have to start preparing your client. You will be leaving in 6 months. You will be leaving for another state. And I didn't know at the time I'd be leaving not only my practice, the state, my marriage, everything.
Oh.
It wasn't on the horizon when the angel came through, all those plans. And so when it was done, and then it told me there was 3 gifts waiting for me and that I would recognize them. I won't go into that right now when they appeared. And that basically when the being was done sharing that with me, my client slumped forward like a Raggedy Ann doll, like something had just left her, like there was no life left her. And suddenly she came back, kind of online, and had no memory of what had happened. And usually she could, if she went back in the system, she'd know what some of the others were doing and so forth. But it was like a wall had been put up, so she couldn't see what that angel was sharing with me. And that wasn't the only time an angel appeared in my my therapy office.
Wow. Message just for you, Kathy.
The other one I'll have to tell you because it really was inspirational. And there was this guy, I also had neurofeedback in my practice. I offered that, so brainwave retraining for head injury and for attention deficit and depression and so forth like that. And this one man had been, he worked in a warehouse where they stacked all those magazine racks that you see at the supermarket. And it fell down on his head. He was unconscious, and he suffered some significant brain injury. And, the neurologist just about gave up on him, because they couldn't do anything. Medication, he had terrible headaches. He couldn't sleep. He was depressed. He was anxious. I mean, if you had any of those symptoms beforehand, once you had the brain injury, it's usually exacerbated. So, they always figured, well, if I can't do anything, the neurofeedback person won't be able to do much either, but I'll make the recommendation. And this man came to me, and we did a lot of sessions to just get his cognitive abilities working better. And so he was able to get off some of his meds. He was sleeping better. He wasn't as depressed. But the thing is that he couldn't let go of the fact that he thought he would be able to pick up his life again where he left off. And, looking at it, you know that you can't totally restore cognitive abilities to where it was before. You can make them a lot better, but not, get them back to that. And so I thought, this is the time that I'm going to do one of those deep alpha theta wave neurofeedback, where eyes closed and relaxed, and trying to bring him back to a theta state where trauma usually gets locked in. That's why talk therapy doesn't always work. You almost, if you've ever been in a car accident, everything seems to slow down as it's happening. It's because you're shifting into a theta slower frequency brain state. So, if you've been traumatized in some way, and, that thought in your mind got into myself, I'll never be loved. I'll never be any good. I'll never be safe. That's all locked in at a slower frequency. So, it was, it was best to see if we could bring him back to that, to see what would happen. So maybe 10 minutes into, he's following the whenever he makes more of one brain activity, he gets the sound of the ocean as opposed to the sound of water running and things like that. So he can follow the rewards. But anyway, so about 10 minutes in, all of a sudden my EEG screen is swamped. The amplitude on it is swamped. And usually that's from artifacts, somebody moving around, but he's not moving around. And I'm quickly, silently checking my equipment to see, is something wrong here? I hadn't seen it like that. And it was like, and then I suddenly was aware that there was something in the room. It's sort of like the hair on your arms stand up, that feeling. And I remember silently saying, I know you're here. I just can't see you. And within a short time after I said that and recognized I knew something was in the room, my EEG screen returned to normal. And so about 15 minutes later, he comes out of the Alpha Theta session, and I asked him, what was that like for you? I didn't tell him anything that had happened on my screen because I didn't know, what really had happened. And he goes, oh my God, I saw an angel. And he said that angel took me back to when I was a child. And we were sitting up in my friend's treehouse, and we were dangling our legs over the side. And it was a beautiful day, and we didn't have any cares in the world. And he says, I think that angel was trying to show me my life could be simple like that again if I allowed it to be. I mean, usually with therapists, it doesn't happen this in one session.
Yeah.
So that was like a miracle.
Yes.
And after that session, it was like his life changed. He started to do gardening. He started to play with his grandchildren. He volunteered as a docent at an aquarium museum, and he was happier. And so, it's sort of like I said, I've only had, to my knowledge, 2 angels show up in my therapy thing, but that showed me, there's so much out there we just don't understand.
Absolutely. It's so profound, isn't it? And I think with a lot of therapies, you have to take it to a deeper level or a higher level than how the problem is surfacing. You've got to take it deeper to find the answers. You can't always solve it on the same level.
No. I mean, things get locked in.
3D.
And I mean, because I dealt with a lot of people, and I'd had my own, not as a child, but obviously in the rape experience at 18, I kind of was able to relate to people being abused. And so I seemed to have more of these people attracted to me. And the thing about anyone who's been severely, like abused as a young child, whether it be emotionally, physically, or sexually, it does open their psychic channels, because they have to be on high alert to protect themselves. I'm looking for the right word. Hyper vigilant, because let's say maybe you have an alcoholic father or something like that, and you don't know if he's going to come home and be in a good mood or if he's going to be a bad mood and beat the hell out of you. So that's what usually happens. So these clients tended to be much more psychic than any of the other clients I ever dealt with because of that. Their senses were just so much more heightened. So they were really interesting to work with. And some of them had contact with other dimensions as well. Yeah. And so I had to learn to be, obviously, I mean, who knows, maybe it didn't really happen, but in their mind it did. Yes. And then again, maybe it did happen, but you did question that. You just ran with it and tried to work with what they gave you. So yes, a lot of that, so I learned a lot of psychopathology, which then later on, it was really helpful to put into my books, but just, understanding, different sides to it. Some of us are lucky. I mean, I was lucky. I grew up in a very normal upbringing, compared to a lot of my clients. But, some of my clients, having heard that I grew up, I didn't go into the whole details of it. They said, well, you wouldn't been as grounded if you hadn't had that background to be able to work with some of us, because these were really demanding clients. A lot of times they were in crisis. And so, it wasn't easy at all,
Certainly what you'd call on the job training, Kathy.
Oh, yes. Nobody ever even touched dissociative identity disorders in school. And, and I think back about it now and I thought, oh, that's crazy. I had to search for an expert to mentor me a little bit in the beginning, and of course, then over time, I got to know what I was really working with and dealing with. But no, they don't teach you that in school at all. No. In fact, you have to unlearn a lot of things they teach you.
Yes. I think you can say that in a lot of avenues. We've had to unlearn a lot.
That's right. To become a good therapist, you have to forget about all that. Oh, do this, do that, and just intuitively go with it. Because there were times, I had a client would come to me and I'm thinking like, oh, wow, I don't know what to do with this one, and it was like, I'd just kind of go in my head and go, what do I do? What do I do? And a thought would come into my head and I'd run with it. And, it would work. I remember somebody coming to me that there was this one, that was really strange. And she had bugs coming out of her eyes, her orifices and everything. And I mean, it's like something out of The Exorcist. And my first question was, when did this first start happening? And she had been involved in a drug experience. I believe it was ecstasy she had used at the time, MDMA. And she was in a very heightened, pleasurable state. And she heard a little voice in her head saying, can I join you?
Oh.
And she said, yeah.
Oh.
And something, infiltrated,
Wow.
came in, some entity came in that would not let go. And at the time, I didn't have the skill set for something like that. So I did find somebody who worked with entities. I mean, I would know how to work with them now, but back then I didn't. And so, I just didn't want all the bugs all over my office.
Such a learning curve. Wow, that's really one out of the box, isn't it? Poor soul. Wow.
I mean, I've seen just about everything, you might say, as a therapist. So not too many things shock me anymore,
Good way to be. You're walking the middle path. That's a good way to be. Yes. You had a psychic opening, Kathy, prior to having a near-death experience in 2003. Can you please tell us what happened at that time?
At my near-death experience?
At your psychic opening.
Oh, well, the psychic opening was actually, I think, the when I was 18 with the rape assault thing. That was the psychic opening. Yes. But after that, I realized I had kind of intuitive flashes about certain things. I mean, it wasn't one of the kind of thing that I'd be a psychic and put out my shingle or anything like that. But, I had probably a lot more deja vu or prophetic dreams. I do remember having, and I paid attention to my dreams. I remember when I lived in New York City, and I was with CBS News at the time, and the New York City Ronald McDonald House had opened. That's a home away from home for children receiving treatment for cancer at places like Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. That was all cancer. And this was a big, beautiful brownstone where the families could stay while they were being treated. And there was this one family, a mother and a daughter, a little girl. She was probably about 7 or 8, I think. Her name was Fernanda. And they had come to the house from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and for treatment. And the girl, she was just beautiful, this little girl, blonde haired, blue eyes, very angelic, but she spoke Portuguese and I didn't. And the mother spoke some English, but not a lot. And so all of a sudden, 2 days or a couple days later, they're gone from the house, and I don't know what happened. I figured they must have gotten bad news. I mean, I went to work at the Ronald House. I left CBS News because when I walked into there to get the story that we were doing on that, I felt like I belonged there. So I volunteered some time, and over time they asked me to help run the house. So when Fernanda and her mother were there and they suddenly left, I wasn't there that day. And a couple days later, I had a dream. And in the dream, I saw Fernanda sleeping in a hospital bed wearing these emerald green pajamas. And I was standing at the foot of the hospital bed, and some voice behind me was saying, "You need to go see her." And, I couldn't see who the voice was. Sometimes in your dreams, you don't get to see who's talking behind you. And I remember saying to the voice, "But I don't speak her language." It was as if I had some type of message or something. So it was such a vivid dream that I woke up the next morning and I couldn't get it out of my head. So I called Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital and found out that she was on the patient roster. She had just had a bone marrow transplant operation, and she was in reverse isolation, meaning that, she had no immunity to anything. You had to put the cap, the booties, the gown, the whole bit on, the mask and so forth like that if you went and visited her. So I'm on my way to the hospital thinking, okay, I've got some message for her, but I don't know what it is. Is she dying? Do I have to, is there something I need to impart? And I remember thinking, like a player on a stage who doesn't know their lines and is really nervous. And I remember thinking, if I screw this up, nobody's ever going to send me to do anything again, So I get to her room and I knock on the door. The door is closed and her mother comes to the door and she recognizes me right away and she beckons me in. And Fernanda is asleep in the bed, just like in the dream. And she's wearing, in real life, emerald green pajamas. So I'm talking with the mother, and the mother explains that, they had to send for a family member to a match for the bone marrow, and that they had rented a place near the hospital so they could have more privacy. And suddenly she turns and she goes, "How come you came here today?" And I'm thinking, well, what do I really say? Because it sounds really bizarre and I'm not really sure myself. And I just said, I had a dream that Fernanda was in the hospital and I just thought I should come see her. And I mean, that's pretty much all I knew anyway. And then the phone rang and she picked it up really quickly and she's talking in rapid Portuguese to, I gather it was her husband. And she starts crying and I'm thinking, oh no, she probably got some bad news. And when she gets off the phone, I said, "What happened? What's wrong?" And she goes, "That was my husband. I told him you had come to come here to visit us. You had a dream." And he said, I was praying to God for a sign that Fernanda would make it through the operation and she'd come out okay. And the sign he asked for, because they knew nobody else in the United States, was an unexpected visitor.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I realized all I had to do was show up, and then you think about if this master computer in the universe is plugging in all the variables. Yeah, we'll send that girl. She's more likely to go,
Yeah.
and everything else. And right around that time, my life was changing and I had asked for a sign that I was on the right path. And I got my sign confirmation. So I figured that in turn, I had to be somebody else's sign.
Yeah.
And that's how it worked out. And she did go back to Brazil. She did come through it fine. And at that time, bone marrow transplant operations were really iffy about success rates. So it was really later on to find out 6 months down the line and so forth that she was doing okay. She came through it. So his prayers were answered.
Yes, it's amazing, Kathy. It just shows that we're in a greater universe than just the 3D reality. We know that. And it's also teaching us to work on our hunches, which you did. That's a remarkable story. And isn't it wonderful when you don't quite know how you're being used, but you know that there's something you have to do, that you're guided to do? It was like me getting in touch with you and saying, yes, I'm coming and I'm bringing my daughter as well. And it was just an amazing time. So you're not...
something like that happened to me just this week again. And I was coming back from playing pickleball at the tennis club, and I'm going down a street, not a highway, but a street that's like 2 blocks from my home. And, I'm only going 15, 20 miles because it has some speed bumps on it, and it's a neighborhood. And all of a sudden, boom, the back of my car, something hit me.
Oh.
And the side passenger back rear wheel, something hit me. And I look in the rear view mirror and I see this child and this bicycle flying up in the air.
Wow.
And, I immediately stop the car, run to the child thinking like, oh my God, did I just kill somebody? And the kid's in the street. There's no blood. He's not unconscious, but he's moaning, he's hurting. And so, I'm screaming for the neighbors to come out. Somebody called 911. The cops came, the ambulance came, everybody came. They checked him out, no broken bones. They made him walk around. He was fine, but there was a huge dent on my car. I mean, a really big dent. And the kid admitted he had no helmet on. He was 7 years old, riding a bicycle down his friend's sloped driveway, didn't stop going out into the street and couldn't stop his brakes in time and went right into my car as it was going past.
Wow.
And, usually you exchange insurance information right there when it's with another car. But when it's with a bicycle, you don't stop to think about, do you have bicycle insurance or do you have something else like that, And, the cops took the insurance information and everything else. And when I get home, I call my insurance and I realize, oh, damn, I've got a $500 deductible.
Oh.
And I'm going to get stuck with this. And it wasn't my fault,
Oh my God.
I mean, I was grateful that the child was okay.
Definitely.
So, my insurance company says, well, who knows, maybe they have homeowners insurance. And I thought that's probably unlikely since it was on the street and so forth. But at least I found what house the child was on the block. And I thought I'll at least go and check and see if the child was okay, 2 days later. So I did. And the mother comes out and she said, well, yes, he's got just a little bump on his head, but he's fine. He's walking with a little limp. So my guess is that he's sore, his hip still. And so I thought, this would be, and I said, by any chance you got any insurance? and she said, no, we just rent here. And I kind of had a suspicion this wasn't going to happen anyway. So anyway, I said, but it would really be important because her son wasn't there at the time, that you take a picture of the damage and you share that with his son, so maybe he'll be more careful. It was a good teaching.
Yeah, for sure.
And she said, yes, that's a good idea. She came out, took a picture of the big dent. And she said, yeah, and I just said, it's going to cost me at least $500. I said, any contribution you can make to that would be greatly appreciated. That's all I said. And she goes, I'm a single mother of 3 children. And I didn't say any more after that because we all know that they don't have anything, and right before I went to see her, I had a psychic hit of her child in a motorcycle accident, and not a good one, a very, very bad motorcycle accident. And so I said to her as I was leaving, I said, this may sound out of the blue, but it would be wise if you kept your child away from motorcycles. And her face dropped and she looked at me. She said, he's riding motorcycles now. And I said, 7 years old? 7 years old? She goes, well, that's why I broke up with my ex. He's into motorcycles. When he visits him, he lets him ride motorcycles without helmets.
How irresponsible.
I talk about here, then no wonder she got rid of the jerk. And she says, and I said, make sure whatever you do, you try to stop that. And she's reading in my eyes what I'm saying without having to say what might happen, because I could see in her eyes that the thought had already occurred to her before I said anything. And so she says something. She goes, "Are you a psychic?" And I said, No, not really. Sometimes I hit some things, and she goes, "I'll give you $100 if you'll give me a reading." And I wanted to say, "Just give me the 100 for the dance," And I said, no. I said, just do whatever you can do to make sure that your son is safe. And I could tell she walked away with the world on her shoulders, and I said to her right before she left, I said, maybe that's why this accident happened.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
So that you could share this picture and what I have said with your ex to a word of warning. You've been forewarned.
Well done.
Yeah.
Non-fiction book, Kathy, Fractals of God, a psychologist near-death experience and journeys into the mystical.
That's a long title, I know.
Fascinating. It is a long title. Would you be open to sharing your experiences of your near-death experience and how you processed that?
Well, yes, this happened. I was in private practice in Los Angeles at the time, and my last client for the evening was a Buddhist nun, and she had said, tonight is the night of the Wesak moon. I didn't know what a Wesak moon was. It happens usually, I think it's the first week in May or something every year, usually around the 6th or the 8th or something like that. And I said, well, what's a Wesak moon? And she said, well, it's when the veils between the dimensions are very thin and anything can happen. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, so, but I didn't, because it was late and it was time for me to go home. It was a long day. So as I'm walking towards my car in the parking lot, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I feel this whoosh energy come out of my solar plexus area. And with it, I immediately felt like empty, like all my best friends had left, like something profound had left. And I felt like I was done with my work here on earth as I knew it. And I didn't know what that meant. And I never had that feeling before, that total profound sense of emptiness. And I remember thinking, am I getting ready to die? There's nothing wrong with me, so I don't think so. But if I'm not, and I have to live with this profound sense of emptiness for the rest of my life, this is not going to feel good. So I remember going home and thinking about this, analyzing it, went into my analytic mode. And I'm sitting there with a cuppa in my hand, a tea, and yeah, that's right. And drinking it, and all of a sudden I see this swirling vortex in my head, my mind's eye. The next thing, I am just sucked into this tunnel, horizontal, feet first, and I'm traveling rapidly, and I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And immediately I thought, is this the tunnel everyone's talked about, the light tunnel? And then the next thought was, did I die? If I did, what did I die of? I wasn't ill. But all these thoughts go through your mind rapidly. It's not like you lose a sense of consciousness. And I thought, well, if I die, there's not much I can do about this now. Let's just go see what it's all about. But I was stopped before I could go into the lights. And remember, I told you earlier, it's because I wasn't supposed to go in there. And I just hovered there, even though I tried to will myself in. And I always laugh at the thought, but I had the thought, or the very irreverent thought at the time, well, this is boring. And with the thought, this is boring because nothing was happening. I was just like in a hovering state. And all this energy poured into me, an implosion of energy, and then spun me back around and sent me back through the tunnel, same way, horizontal feet first, traveling really fast. Next thing, I found myself back in my physical body. The tea had fallen all over me. I knew I hadn't fallen asleep, and my whole left side was paralyzed. I couldn't move, and I was by myself. And, you know, I was like, what am I going to do? I can't move. And I started, I was hearing voices in my head as I was getting into my body. Breathe, Kathy, breathe. And I realized in that moment that somehow my heart had stopped. And I didn't find the evidence of that till many years later, when a cardiologist found scar tissue on the left side of my heart and saying, how did that get there? You know, have you ever had a heart attack? And, you know, and I hadn't told him anything about this near-death experience. But so anyway, the voices in my head are saying, you know, are letting me know that somehow my heart had stopped and they were trying to get me to breathe back into my physical form. And of course, you know, not good to hear voices in your head sometimes, but there was nothing I could do. So I just listened to them, and they just said, relax, relax. It's going to be okay. And I could actually hear in my head like a clicking sound as they were getting my left side of my body back online with the whole body. And I suddenly had feeling again in that left side. But it left me with a little bit of a pressure in my heart area. And I thought at the time I was going to have to go see a cardiologist, and the voices pretty much said, nope, everything will be fine. So I never did until many years later during COVID, when suddenly, you know, I was wheezing and I thought I better check this out. And that's when he said, you know, you've got scar tissue there. And I don't know how you got it there, but it's there. But I've never had any problem with my heart. But anyway, within 24 hours after returning to my physical body, I was obsessed with quantum physics. I was obsessed with, you know, the universe, the cosmos, you name it. And, you know, I'd had a mild interest in it, but now it was like obsessive. And so I was I was getting up between 3 and 4 a.m. every night because I couldn't sleep. And I'd have to go and look on my computer to look up what I was hearing in my head. And I was understanding what I was reading, but they were also correcting what was on the internet. And they said, well, that's not totally true. This is true. This part isn't true. But that's as far as your race's understanding of this science is. So it was kind of the correction part. But then every day I would go back into work, and I knew something had changed because I was feeling everybody's emotions, and it felt gunky and it didn't feel good. You know, I was trying to figure out what's mine, what's theirs, you know, and, I suddenly was much more tuned into everything that was going on with my clients. This was going on. And night after night, I was getting between 3 and 4 a.m., my quantum learning or whatever. And so I called a good friend of mine who's written many books. He's a timeline reader and a very medical intuitive. And he had worked with me on very difficult cases in the past with clients' permission. He just needed their name. He never wanted to know anything about, you know, their background or their pathology. He just needed their permission and their name. And he would look to see what was happening on a soul perspective. And once he showed me that, it was much easier to navigate the treatment with the client, understand what was going on, and we could move through it easier. So I just called him and I said, would you take a look and see what's going on with me? I didn't tell him what had happened, but he took quite a while coming back, and he said, well, you almost died. He said, but the strange thing is all your old guides have left. That was that whoosh coming out of my solar plexus area. Yeah. And he says, you have a whole new set of guides. They're very technologically oriented, very kind of geeky. And my first question was, what do they want? You know, he said, this looks like some type of soul contract. And he said, they're showing me that you came back, you're going to invent some type of, he says, it kind of looks like a medical device, health medical device, something of that nature. And I laughed and I said, I don't know anything about inventing. I don't know anything about electronics, you know. And he goes, well, apparently they're going to point you in the right direction. And I remember thinking, well, he's finally wrong. And, you know, because his batting average had been so good up until that, you know. And so, but, you know, to make a long story short, it became like this magnificent obsession. I tried to walk away from this, whatever this destiny I was supposed to do. But it wouldn't let go of me until finally at one point I threw up my arms and said, okay, what do you want? You know? And then I tried to start working with other scientists and everything would go wrong. And then they said, we don't want them to do it. We want you to do it. You know, and I didn't think I had the ability to do this. But once I finally acquiesced and came on board with the agenda, you know, then it started coming down in 3 different ways. Sometimes they would talk to me, sometimes they would show me pictures, and sometimes it would be whole concepts coming down that I wasn't privy to before. And, you know, it was 5 years of developing these software technology. And basically, I mean, the whole point behind most of it was that everything in the universe has a mathematical signature to it, and that our DNA is mathematically coded, and that you know, it's sort of like when they send things in space, you know, it's in math because it's the universal language. And they said the consciousness of the cells take better instruction when it's given information versus in mathematical. And at the time I thought, oh God, this has got to be a cosmic joke, you know, because my worst subject in school was math. And, you know, but then again, they said that was actually in the long run, that was good because I didn't have any preconceived notions about, well, that won't work, this won't work, you know, mathematical science says that's impossible. And so, you know, we tied in not only, I think it was a little bit over a year and a half's time, thousands of different substances, what the mathematical algorithm for which was for each of these things. And I mean, everything from gemstones to herbs to vitamins to concepts to emotions to, you know, it was on and on. And it sounded insane and crazy. And I remember not telling my friends what I was actually doing because they would say, oh, poor Kathy, she's lost her mind, you know? But if I listened to what was said, you know, I felt somewhat at peace, you know, as if I was on the right track. I didn't know where it was all going, if it was all a fool's mission or whatever, but I was trusting in the process. And, you know, so then they brought in the science of fractals to amplify this mathematical information, certain types of sound. So sounds could carrier wave into the consciousness of the cells. And then I will say, well, how do you deliver this to the person out of your computer? And then they showed me a picture of Superman in the, because they look for certain things that you already have in your memory.
Now, did you find them, Kathy?
And Superman is in the Fortress of Solitude downloading these crystals, the history of his race. And I'm thinking like, oh my God, I got to find some Superman crystals. And, you know, and they let me know early on that I wasn't going to find these type of crystals in any gem shop, that they had to be lab grown and specified a certain way to be able to take information and let go of it immediately, where regular crystals take in information and hold it in. They don't let go of it. No. So, you know, I remember even I couldn't quite figure out how to do the handles for these crystal rods that we have, you know, circuitry wires into a digital analog box, which is then, you know, plugged into your computer. And I remember riding my bicycle in Santa Monica down by the Pacific Ocean there, and they kept forcing me to look down at my bicycle handle, the handlebar grips. And then it was like a light bulb went off. Oh, something like that. of course, then, I had designed it and it all worked out. And like I said, 5 years later, I've got this machine and I'm thinking, now what do I do with it? So basically, I was led to in Denver, Colorado. There was a big conference of subtle energy workers, and I'd never done a conference before. I mean, as a vendor, So I put out a couple machines. They were still in their kind of first iteration of the software, and invited people free to just give me feedback. Tell me, because I had no idea what would happen, what they would do. And before long, I had a line at my booth. And some of the other vendors were not too happy about that because I was like taking away all their business. But people were getting on, and these people could see what was going on around the person when they were on certain types of programs. And for instance, one person said, "Oh, I'm seeing all this like glass sharding coming out of the body everywhere." And I looked over and it was like release emotional blockages. And another one said, "Oh, no, there's this kind of rainbow plumping. I don't know what this is." And I look over and the program was balance energy centers, and this one guy, he was an optometrist, but he had a psychic practice. And I didn't really know him. And, shortly after I'd had my near-death experience, my father died, and a year later, my mother died, and they left me the money to really develop this technology. And so he gets off and he's crying, this man. And, he said, "Well, I didn't think I'd see this technology. This is Atlantean technology. I didn't think I'd see it in this lifetime. It's just packaged differently."
Wow. So he knew about this, Kathy.
So, I knew I'd been in Atlantis. And he said, as soon as I got on, all of my guides came forward. They knew what this was for. And he said they started adjusting my psychic ability, like fine tuning, looking for the right channel for my information to come through. He said, then I saw all these beings that were behind this device. He said, all these light beings. And he said, and then this man came forward. He said he was your father. And he said, that was money well spent. And this guy did not know me, did not know anything that had happened. And, it was like, wow, but it was quite a profound confirmation.
Excellent.
And yeah. And it came out in 2009, the beginning of 2009. And here we are in 2023. And I've got, devices all over the world, practitioners all over the world that have incorporated it into their practice. And they have instructed us on all the unusual ways they've used it in ways that I never would have thought about. And, it's just, and they've shared all that knowledge with all other practitioners because, it didn't come with a book up front, like it'll do this and it'll do that. Yes, it'll do remote treatments. And yes, it'll do this, but we didn't discover that until we started experimenting. So yeah, well,
Yeah, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Do you know who these interdimensional beings were guiding you through the process? And are there any other beings you have interacted with not from here?
Well, of course, there was the commander. He definitely wasn't from here. These beings that said they were from the 8th dimension, it's a plane of like pure light. So you're not going to see them in form like they would look humanoid or anything like that. And apparently they said, I've done this work before. That's why they wanted me to do it. They said, you know how to do this. And I didn't think I did, but it was like a reawakening that memory. And as I started getting into it, I realized what had to be incorporated into it. They were giving me some of but then it started to build, and I could see more of what was going on. And of course, a lot of people don't talk about that. The Atlanteans, which obviously were the ones that were very instrumental in ancient Egypt, their advancement, but the Atlanteans were really taught by the Arcturians. And the
Ah,
Arcturians were masters at crystals. I mean,
oh,
they're really the most evolved race in the universe. And so, it's sort of like who teaches who, and of course all that history gets lost or hidden or something like that. And then of course, what can be used for good can be used for bad too, just like, they say, the Atlanteans, misused their crystals that can be used as lasers and everything else. They were so much more advanced than we are now.
Yes.
And in the last 100 years, you've had a lot of Atlanteans reincarnating. So that's why we've had such an explosion in technology in the last 100 years.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I mean, there's some things I didn't always share at Egypt, but in this last year, because I wrote 3 books in the Stack series, and then I decided to fast forward 20 years later, and what had happened to one of the characters in it. And it got me into the whole world of projecting forward 20 years into the future with AI and where AI would go and everything. And so they allowed me to see something that I hadn't seen in Egypt before. And, the Sphinx. And the Sphinx, if you look at the Sphinx with that, that little head and that big body.
Not the original.
It doesn't make sense, because the Egyptians were very precise in form and proportion and everything else. And of course, they showed me at one time it was the head of Anubis. And Anubis was the jackal. If you've ever seen the jackal, and he's the god of the afterlife. He was the god of mummification, the god of embalming, the god of protection of the grave. He protected the whole Giza plateau, which they called Risto back then. And so over time, the body, which has gone through so much cosmetic surgery, it doesn't look anything like it did originally. And it certainly, wasn't a lion. That body was covered with sand, and it was only the big head that might have been exposed during one time. And of course, things crumble and or people take pot shots at it or so forth like that. And what, happened was that back in later times, like we restore all of our ancient monuments. We continue to do that. The ancient Egyptians did the same thing. So it was back, I believe, in the second dynasty, Amenhotep. I always stumble around the name. He was the second. He was big into restoration, and he probably took that nub that was left over to the head of this and decided to fashion it into his likeness. And we have found pictures of him, and it does look like the same guy. Even the headdress, the headdresses show different dynasties and so forth like that. And so, the Egyptians don't talk about that kind of stuff. They still think that everything's 4,000 years old.
I know, crazy.
But what my guides were showing me was that Anubis was AI.
Oh, really?
He was not human or animal. He was a machine.
Wow.
Atlanteans. And he was one of that they took with it, because they knew how to. He was like one of the survivor type of, and that's why he seemed like a god to them. And of course, I think that the Egyptians, they were very much big into mummification. And I think the Atlanteans, who were big into cloning, taught the Egyptians to preserve. If they could preserve things, they could be reactivated at some time in the future when all of that technology came back online, you might say. Yes. So, they put their heart and their organs in canopic jars. They mummified their pets, their servants, their loved ones in the tombs with them, so that they could be reactivated from their DNA.
Yes.
And that DNA, what people don't think, they think the DNA is just, physical traits that the person will look the same. but the intelligence of the person is also encapsulated in their DNA.
So can I just stop you there for a wee moment, Kathy, because this is interesting. So are you saying that not only can they reconstitute from the DNA a being that looks the same, but has the original soul come into the body? Because that's not what we would commonly think.
No, not soul, the original intelligence. And see, this way they knew if they could bypass the soul thing, they could be immortal and live forever. It's sort of like our cryo freeze, people freezing their bodies to be, to find a cure in the future and then forever live. And see, that's what people is missing. It's not just the AI of the super intelligence. The real thing behind it is longevity, immortality, and without the soul, they're bypassing karmic retribution.
Wow. So can you talk about the intelligence? So what sort of intelligence being brought back into the original body in more modern form? Where is that intelligence coming from? What is it? Is it the AI intelligence you're talking of?
Well, the thing is as they're bringing back cloning techniques and they can infuse that consciousness into a device now, into a machine.
I gotcha.
I mean, this sounds like something out of sci-fi, but it's very capable of doing it. And I always remembered a reading that Edgar Cayce had done about the Sphinx, saying that, the Atlanteans, because they knew that it could happen again, we've had like 8 shifting of axes of the planet, and lands have gone down, others have risen up, but they had many outposts all over the world. Antarctica was one of them. It was once very fertile, lush place. So they had these outposts where there was like maybe about 5 areas that they secreted this information, like a time capsule thing in case this should happen again. And of course, one of the places was supposedly in the right paw of the Sphinx. Well, Cayce had said, it won't be opened until the right time, until the time is right, until man has evolved to that point. He said, and there is a sleeping sentry on duty. And as soon as I heard this with the information I got, it goes, oh my God, they probably have an Anubis robot machine down there, that will come back online when the time, and of course, man has to get to the point of AI where it becomes threatening again. It's a warning from the past to the future.
Well, there have been people I know that have been down there in their out-of-body experiences with a guard that greets them, as in, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
So there is a being as a guard that is.
There is a being, and
that looks a bit like
I'm
Anubis,
saying
actually.
It's probably an Anubis robot, a robotic device. Yes.
That is fascinating.
It's sort of like those in Egypt. They have the perpetual tomb lamps that they found over the years. They'd open up an old tomb and a light would go off, and they'd see little rivulets of mercury in some of these tombs. And of course, they always thought it was the curse of the pharaohs. What they didn't know, that they were mercury vapor lamps. And that's, they got wise over time. They drill holes, let whatever vapor came out or whatever bad energy, and then they would go into the tombs. But in the beginning, they didn't. And the sickness they got was mercury poisoning.
Oh, wow.
And mercury was like a self-combustion engine. It would keep kind of igniting, so you'd have this perpetual lamp always going on, lit in for thousands of years in this cave. And it's mercury is self-sustaining, and they would find mercury. They found it, they didn't know why it was. They found it under the pyramids, the Bosnian pyramids in Serbia, Croatia, and they had found some evidence of mercury also in Teotihuacan. the pyramids there. And, it's sort of like the tools of the alchemists back then were salt, sulfur, and mercury. You could create magic with the combination of some like that. Those were the magician's tools.
And the last emperor, where he was buried with all the terracotta horses and soldiers that we've heard of more recently, the whole river underneath that, it was almost like a pyramid in itself, was mercury. And he used to ingest mercury thinking it would give him longevity, but it killed him.
Yes.
But mercury is a very, very interesting component.
They use it. The crafts use it for spacecraft use it for anti-gravity. Their self-sustaining engine. It's a you never run out of fuel. It reuses and reuses and reuses itself. So it's kind of interesting, but for years nobody understood what's this like. It's like thermometer beads. If you broke a thermometer and you get all those little mercury beads, what's going on here? What were they doing with this stuff? And of course, it takes years before science catches up and goes, oh, that's what they were doing.
After your NDE, Kathy, what inspired you? I can kind of imagine we've touched on it, to go to Egypt and then lead groups there.
Well, I first had scheduled to go to Egypt in 2011, 2 years after my technology came out, and a month before I was supposed to go, they had the Arab Spring uprising. Egypt erupted. Cairo, it was just a big mess. And of course, the Cairo Museum, remember our guide Harris, all those young Egyptologists formed a human chain around that pyramids. Around that, the old Cairo Museum, so that it wouldn't be looted. So I had to wait to 2014 to make my first trip because nobody was going to Egypt. They had to get rid of the Muslim Brotherhood, the radical element of that. Egypt had to ban that because they knew it just destroyed their tourism. People went bankrupt and broke, and they just realized that even though they're all Muslim, they did not want this radical faction in the country. So once they got rid of that, Egypt started to renew itself and come back. And I went. And I happened to get into a very small little group of, Harris was with us, by the way. That was where I was introduced to him, and 3 other people who had all been to Egypt before. And we were going to have our private time in the King's Chamber, and they said, well, we've already done it. We don't want to really spend the money. And I said, well, I'll pay for everybody then. I don't want to miss this, because they were about ready to bypass it. Which was good. So I figured because I'd paid for everything, I got more time in there to explore. And so immediately I got into the stone box there, which they call the sarcophagus. And I, without knowing it, I immediately started toning because it was like such a wonderful sound chamber. And as I'm toning in there, and really enjoying it, all of a sudden in my mind's eye, I see a lid slide shut on the sarcophagus. Now, there wasn't a lid in real life there. And in my mind's eyes, I saw it and I was entombed in there. And of course, I didn't know that in a past life, I actually had been entombed. But I was panicked. The first moment of panic, I'm entombed in here. I'm going to die inside this pyramid, this sarcophagus. And my guide said to me, you know what to do. And then I realized I did know what to do, without thinking about it. I immediately slowed down my breathing. And I started to feel, as I got slowed down my breathing, I felt my body rising out of my astral body, my etheric body, rising near death, an out-of-body experience, out of my physical body. And this big hole opened up in the bottom of the sarcophagus, not in real life, but, in my mind's eye, it was all lit up. And I started going down into it, flying down into it. And I did remember thinking, aren't I supposed to be going up? Am I ascending up? Why am I going down? You know, and I saw different cavities in it. In fact, later I would see, even above the Grand Gallery, I saw that there was an open space, a void up there with what looked like a smaller pyramid shape, which might be the capstone. And, you know, later on when they did the Scan the Pyramid project, they did find a void up there.
Yes, they did.
Yes. Yes, but nobody will go up there to actually see if the capstone was actually put in there. But I was going down into the pyramid, so I was seeing kind of chambers. And then I was going down way, way, way deep in the pyramid, and I saw water tunnels under there. Now, I'd never heard of anybody talk to me about water tunnels. And so then I went even further, and I saw what looked like the remains of a city, which I found very interesting. I mean, it was long gone, but there was like a civilization underneath the Giza plateau. And the next thing, I found myself going through a tunnel that led up through into the Sphinx, and I shot out of the head of the Sphinx. Now, at the time, I didn't know that there was actually a hole on the top of the head. They used to do kind of like, you know, like the Great Oz oracles in that head one time.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the guy of the threesome that I had been there with leaned over the sarcophagus and said, "Kathy, are you done in there yet?" And immediately it was like, whoosh, right back to my physical body.
Yeah.
And after that, I was obsessed with finding those water tunnels. So Harris, who is our Egyptologist guide, who Jude knows well, I said, have you heard of any water tunnels under there? He goes, I know there's shafts, but I don't know about any water tunnels. And I said, is there a way we can, you know, we need to negotiate. We need to find a way to get down there. And of course, everything's negotiable in Egypt, but the head of the Giza plateau, they said no. They wanted to know how I knew about that there were water tunnels, because apparently the last person that was the 1952 Dr. Salim Hassan had found those water tunnels, which was then called the Osiris shaft, and the water tunnels underneath it. So we
what
kept
about Zahi Hawass? Would he have known?
Oh, I'm sure he probably would have known, but the general public wouldn't have known, you know, because he had to have known if an Egyptologist in 1952 had been down there. Yes. You know, it's just that those are the type of things they just don't talk about. There's a lot of things they don't talk about, you know, and so we you know, we came to a price, and I thought, oh, I would have paid much more, you know, but I was glad. And at 4 a.m. in the morning, the head of the Giza plateau, Harris, and myself were walking with flashlights, you know, and over the, you know, the terrain, and we get to an iron door underneath the causeway. And the Giza plateau guy gives me the key, and he says, "You want to open it?" And I said, "Well, of course." You know, so I was the first one down. There's 3 levels. And there's just this old iron ladder going down. And, you know, you can't bring really groups down there because the liability factor would be off the charts. You know, somebody could kill themselves easily. We got to the first level. It was kind of an airless room, and it had some kind of like, it almost looked like the poles from a tent, you know, a tent-like structure, but nothing over it. And so and it had a winch on it. And so you couldn't quite figure out what that was about. And the guy didn't really know either. And then we got down to we had to go down another maybe 50 or 60 feet down another ring of iron ladders to the second level. Now, second level had 7 niches in it. Big ones for huge sarcophaguses, and there was only 2 sarcophaguses left in there, and they had the lids open on them, so you could look down in there, you know. And I checked the insides of it, and I could see there's no way you could get these big sarcophaguses down those shafts. You know, they look like they were made in forms. They probably brought the stone down, some emulsifying agent, put it in forms, and let it set in place, and that's how it came to be. And, there's 7 gods of the underworld. So I thought, oh, this probably is the 7 niches for each of those 7 gods.
Was there anything in them, Kathy?
Any what?
Was there anything in them?
No, they were empty. One almost looked like it was made of basalt, or black granite. It was very, very, very dark, and but it had very smooth exterior, inside and out. And there was some resin in the seams in the inside of it. It everything to me said it was like slip cast. And so, there wasn't much to be seen on that level. So then we went down to the 3rd level, the very final one. And there was water lapping around the final 2 rungs of the ladder. And those were where the water tunnels were. And the water was about hip deep, and it was filled with papyrus shreds and bits of wood. And there was an old pier that Dr. Salim Hassan in 1952 had erected there so that they could, take different pictures of different, areas and so forth like that. And it was falling down. And, very few people had ever been down there, maybe people in the know, but certainly no tourists. So I didn't know if they were going to tell me I couldn't take pictures, but I was taking pictures really quickly just in case somebody would stop me. And I was also, and in the water, there was a sarcophagus that had lettering, not like hieroglyphic lettering, but a design lettering on it. And it was stone. You could see it. It was buried in the water, but you could still see the markings on it. And I asked the guy, the Giza Plateau guy, has anybody ever tried to open this? And he goes, no. And I thought, well, then they can't open it, And then I heard my guides tell me, well, they can't open it because it's hermetically sealed and you have to have the right DNA to get into it.
Makes sense. How big was this, Kathy? How big was it?
It looked like the size of a large casket. Now I couldn't see underneath it. I could only see the headstone, that the cover for it, you might say. So I wasn't allowed to go into the water. I mean, I would have loved to. I would have liked to take a raft through all those tunnels. I would have done all of it if I could, but they didn't want you to go that far. So I and my guides had said that it was a portal opening. So there is definitely a portal underneath the Great Pyramid. So I kind of incorporated that into one of my novels, as well. But anyway, so I reached into my backpack because I had already prepared that I was going to take water samples to see, if there was anything unusual. I had a magnometer, and it registered a little bit more electromagnetic energy down there than I would have thought the norm would have been. And it felt like there was a little bit of electricity to the air or to the water there. So, but, I'm not a scientist in that realm. So it was like I only did what I could in the short period of time I was available to go down there. So I took the water sample bottles out that I prepared because I had talked to a lab beforehand, and scooped up water in it. And they were surprised that I did that. I guess nobody had ever taken water samples down there. And as I was reaching for them before I took the sample, I'm reaching in, and all of a sudden, I was staying at the Mina House next door to the Great Pyramids, the very old hotel that, very historical. And they had key cards to your rooms, to open your door. And it flew out of my backpack. And normally, if you drop something, it falls straight down. This flew out, and it flew right onto the sarcophagus's lid.
Does that mean it was magnetic, Kathy?
Well, I guess so. Because it was like, if you think about it, it was like, wow, it kind of flew out of the air. How did that happen?
Yeah.
I was like, who else is down here? Kind of thinking. But it could have something to do with the magnetic down there. I really don't know.
For a
but
portal.
but the head of the Giza Plateau took a little, piece of wood, and he's trying to get it back, and it's just digging into the silt deeper. So that key card is still there. I thought, how interesting. It's sort of symbolic. My key,
Yes,
get into this
yes.
portal, but I wasn't able to open the portal. And so the water samples really showed, we had a number of tests we ran on it, and there's so many different types of water tests you can run. I could have been doing it forever, but each one of them was hefty in price. And so we took 3 that we thought would be the most apropos. And it showed normal, like potassium and magnesium and calcium in the water, but it showed a high content of sodium.
Oh.
Now, during ancient times, the Nile River came up to where the Sphinx is. It didn't come up to the Great Pyramid. It came up to where the Sphinx temple would have been, and which is right in front of the Sphinx. And right now it's like about Nile River's like 5 miles from the Giza Plateau, because after the Aswan Dam was put in, everything got, kind of relocated.
Yeah.
And so the Nile River is a freshwater river. So we're thinking, where did this salt, where did the salinity come from? It's a little too far from the ocean, and so I really got to thinking about this, and I started tracking down other places that, and I came across the Hawara Pyramid about 75 miles from the Great Pyramid. And at one time it was known to have a saltwater lake, and that had turned from fresh to salt water, and people really didn't know why. That lake is no longer there. But if you go to Hawara, there's all these it shows that there is some tunnels that have collapsed, and there was water there. And there's moguls all around this pyramid showing that there's been collapsing. And so there's a heavy military influence around this particular, it's all the way out in the desert. Most people don't take the groups to go to Hawara. But I suspected that there was tunnels leading from Hawara 75 miles away to the Great Pyramid. And then there was this archaeologist. The Egyptians did not want her to do any ground penetrating radar or any excavating or anything like that. So she did some ground penetrating radar on the QT. And what she saw there was huge, like football-sized bunkers on 3 different levels underneath the Hawara Pyramid, and some of them had collapsed. So my guess, I'm looking at this, internally, seeing what had done, it was sort of like the river Styx, the underworld, the afterlife, going through the different tests, the weighing of the heart against the feather, all that stuff. Was through the passage. And if you see these boats, they call them solar boats on the walls, but these boats were also used in water. And so I think it was a very ritualistic rite of passing for the pharaoh. And what better way to have, they might have started it at Hawara, and the final destination was the Great Pyramid and the portal there.
Very interesting. That's
why they call it the Osiris shaft.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting fact. Also, if these pyramids were used as generators, because I think they were multi-purposed, they had to have water. They had to have water nearby to be used for the charging up of the pyramid, to do, whether it was weather manufacture or putting out the Christ consciousness grid or whatever they wanted it to do.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
They found that there were water tunnels under the Bosnian pyramid, under Teotihuacan, under Chichen Itza, the Mayan pyramid near Cancun. And I'm sure there's other ones. So I think it was a prerequisite. And at one time, the Great Pyramid has had many functions. Originally, it was an Earth stabilizer.
Yeah.
Because of the grid and the shifting of the planetary axis. And it's considered, the very center heart of our planet on the grid pattern, on the ley lines, everything else. And then I think it was used as a hydroelectric source, and then it was used for rituals and initiations and a lot of other things. But of course, it was never used ever as a tomb in any way.
No.
So it's been used for lots of different things, So
Kathy, it's where they say the truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh my God, yes. I always say, because I've looked back at a lot of the ancient texts and they all refer to, not just Plato's thing, but Herodotus and some of the other Pliny and some of the, ancient philosophers about land, that a large land in the Atlantic, that with advanced civilizations. And, we always thought it was mythical, but because most of their information all was destroyed and went down, one of my last memories of Atlantis, which is, I probably still have a little bit of that fear today. I'm standing on the shore and seeing this huge tsunami, a wall of water coming towards me and a number of other people, and knowing that, I was going to die and drown. And I'm sure in one of the upheavals, I did die that way. And to this day, I'm still a little nervous around high waves, big waves.
Understandable.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's like, just like being entombed.
Yes. That's an interesting word after talking about what we're talking about. The next couple of questions you've already answered, because I was going to ask you about the pyramids and the water functioning, etc. Can I ask, Kathy, what was your main takeaway from Egypt overall and deeper understanding from those experiences?
Well, my guides really wanted me to go back to Egypt because they knew that I would rediscover my ancient roots. And I knew I had a really close affinity for Abydos Temple, which was the home to the Melchizedek Brotherhood. Of course, the Egyptians never talk about that, that's not on the radar, but I knew it was there. It was the cosmic priest to the priest. They were the true visionaries. There is a Stargate portal at Abydos, and it's no coincidence that, we've had all these, like Stargate, the movie, and Abydos, the video game. It's in the collective consciousness. Just like after I found out that Anubis was AI, I started to look around and found out that in video games, the character Anubis is AI. So it's already in the collective consciousness what this once was. And I also had a very close affinity to Saqqara, the healing temples there, the sound and the color and the light and everything else. And I remember the first time I was there, and Saqqara is the 5-step pyramid, and there's this kind of open courtyard, and there was this kind of a little bit of a raised platform. And I remember Harris saying, well, that's so they can, when they do their celebrations, they can ride the horses and the chariots or whatever around. And I said, no, that's not what it was for. I said, that was the opening to the Temple Beautiful. They had the Temple Beautiful, the Temple Sacrifice. I mean, because they had some cloning problems from ancient Egypt, some of those mythical characters that we hear about actually did exist. And some of those creatures had to be helped. And some of their DNA was entombed so that it wouldn't be ever used again. And so years later, Harris said, they start excavating that part. And just where you said the opening would be to the Temple Beautiful, they found the opening. So I think a lot of us, that memory is buried because most of us have all had lifetimes in Egypt, I just kept coming back, I probably the priesthood over and over again, and fighting the almond priesthood, which were a corrupt lot, and I remember lifetime with Akhenaten, and that was kind of an interesting story because, he was kind of considered the heretic king that wanted to bring back to one God instead of the multi-gods, which a lot of the Egypt priesthood, the almond priesthood, were into. The more gods you had, the more offerings could be made, the more money the almond priest, sort of like, the Catholic Church today or so forth, there's always a way to make money. So at that point, the Great Pyramid was also being used as an ascension device, an interdimensional conduit. And it got corrupted. And I've met some of those same scientists who are alive today who are part of that corruption process. But by the time they kept telling Akhenaten and some of us, everything is, no, it's going to work, but it didn't work. And what had happened, it entrapped souls between dimensions. And when, I realized that again, I just started crying because I remember how we were deceived by that this was supposed to be open between the dimensions, and we could travel through the stars. We could, there's there's certain places in the desert in Egypt where they actually made contact with the Great White Brotherhood and so forth. But so what happened, because he didn't fulfill his mission in that lifetime, and it had to come around and wait around to another kind of ascension point in the future, he came back as Jesus Christ. So he reincarnated there, and I reincarnated there. And then I had some lifetimes with the Essenes, which, brought him into, so we kind of hang out in the same soul grouping circles, you might say, and so, I mean, not to say that there's anything special, but, we all have soul groupings or family groupings.
Absolutely.
Reincarnating in those same groups. So I've met a lot of those same people today, and, some of them obviously, are still up to their old tricks. But, hoping that maybe they're getting a chance to get it right in this lifetime.
Oh, I hope so. I hope so, Kathy. You mentioned earlier that you have had an active, lucid, and often prophetic dream life. Have any of your dreams come true? Well, you've spoken about one or two that have. And could you talk about some of those, please?
Well, I think the most profound one, I think, was the Fernanda one, about all that coming into place. I have seen things that have happened to friends before it happened. And sometimes I was able to kind of warn them off, or, so that it wasn't as profound as, could have been. But I've seen some good things happen too, and, most of them are probably a little bit more personal stories that I don't have the, to share with people because I don't have permission from people. But I do, if I have one of those dreams, I certainly follow it. And in the last month, I was led to start wearing shungite. And not realizing that shungite will create very vivid dream life if you wear it at night when you sleep. And all of a sudden, man, I was having the most vivid dreams and detailed dreams. It's supposed to make you deeply sleep. But of course, if you're in a dream state, you're in a REM, deep sleep anyway. And if it was too much for people, they just said, well, just put it near your bed or on your nightstand or something like that. But shungite also is a way of warding off electromagnetic energy.
Yep, absolutely. That's what I've got one for, Kathy. Absolutely. Yep.
So a little bit lately, it's before I had, it's a friend of mine, I was just talking to her the other day, and she said, in the last 2 weeks, she's had 4 Anubis dreams. And this was before I even told her about my thing about Anubis.
Wow.
4 Anubis dreams, and locking the doors and keeping Anubis out, which I thought was kind of interesting. And she said I was successful, but I just kept making sure all the doors and windows were locked and Anubis couldn't get in.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, I okay, what do you make of that? Being in Maui, there's a lot of healers here. And, dream circles and people, lots of energy work. And, they always say people come to Maui to heal. And a lot of them stay behind and open practices and so forth. Now, I retired my clinical practice years ago. And so, I'm still working with the Ascension11, Trinfinity8. And I found I could escape into my world of, my book world during COVID. And that came out of a dream.
Oh, wow.
That came out of a dream many years ago in Santa Monica. I remember a client telling me that she had had a near-death experience. And she went to some place where it was like a library. And she could look up lots of things that really were happening, kind of like the Akashic records. And I remember saying to her, oh, kind of like a library of truth.
Oh.
And it's stuck in my subconscious, the library of truth. And then one night I had this dream of the whole plot of Stax. And Stax is behind the scenes of, where all the information is kept in a library, all the research and reference materials. And Stax, I didn't know, is also kind of, in computer language, a kernel of information.
Kathy, you must have been reading my script before I asked the questions, because that was my very next question.
Yes,
please tell us about your books.
Okay. Yeah, I knew we'd get to that sooner or later. So I had this dream, and I had to get up in the middle of the night and start writing down the plot points to it, because it was so vivid. And what it was that, I took some of my own take on it, but it was of an employee in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., the biggest library in the world. And he stumbles upon an interdimensional portal into a library of truth, where all the facts are kept on everyone and everything since the beginning of time. And it's all in holographic format. So you could actually step in it, be kind of relive it and see what's going on. But what he finds out is that there's this kind of, because there's always got to be a boogie guy, boogeyman and Illuminati or whatever. And he finds that this ancient society of power brokers from all over the world has had access into this library and is using it to manipulate mankind. And he has to find a way to free this information and expose what they're doing without being killed. Now, the character is a really interesting character because he's got acquired savant syndrome, meaning that when you get acquired savant syndrome, it's usually from an accident, head injury. And he had it, baseball hit him in the head when he was like 7 years old, and his wiring in his brain got a little weird, and he became a genius in mathematical and computational analysis, and like a computer nerd on steroids, but he also got synesthesia, and he sees the world in numbers and patterns. If music was to play, he would see music, he would see numbers coming on waves in the air from the music. If whatever you're eating, he'd see numbers coming out of it and so forth. So it turned out it's a blessing and a curse. And he uses that to actually, to stumble upon the actual mathematical algorithm, you might say, that opens this library within a library.
Oh.
And then, he finds that the rabbit hole is much deeper than he thought. Just like I thought it was going to be one book, and it turned into 3 books, a continuing saga. Takes in Antarctica, it takes in the alien agenda, it takes in, I've incorporated some of my own experiences with remote viewing, with seeing things in space, with the water tunnel pier. I mean, I've woven all this stuff into that because I figured I'm not going to write a book, another nonfiction book. You know, I'm just going to incorporate this in, and my friends will say, "Oh, well, that's Kathy's experience. That one I think she might have made up, but that one's true." And as I was writing it, it felt like it was being channeled. Yeah. I mean, there were things that I was writing that I didn't even know existed. And I would stop and go, "Oh, really?" And I'd hear, yes.
Funny that.
It's definitely a channeled series. And it was a story that wanted to be told. And I think it was the right time, because I call this the age of discernment, you know, trying to sift the wheat from the chaff. You know, what's up, what they say is true might be false. What may be false is actually true. What's up is down. I mean, our whole world and our concept of what is truth is just topsy-turvy. And, you know, when I first started writing this, I thought, well, maybe it's not the right time. And then I realized, oh my God, I was right, going into the thick of things with the COVID years. And so I lost myself into that whole thing. And so and then I spent a whole week in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., working with the librarians there, getting behind the scenes, seeing things that nobody ever gets to see there, so that I could actually make it realistic and get it right. So if anybody read that book, say, well, she must have been an employee here, because, you know, I got in all the tunnels underneath that, all under Capitol Hill, and all the things under all the libraries and the court systems. And I mean, that there's just a maze of tunnels underneath that, you know, have all different types of, whether it be cafeterias and restaurants and vendor things and you know, archives and yeah, so it's all there. And I remember sitting in the main reading room, which you have to have a certain librarian card to get in. Nobody can just walk into it. And, you know, you got to go through a metal detector, and you're not supposed to bring in, you know, camera. But the cover of my first book actually shows the picture I took in the place, and I used it. And I guess you can see, yeah, here we go. I don't know if you can see. That's the cover. I took that cover. That's in the main reading room in there. And I remember looking up and seeing this elaborate Father Time clock with gold and brass and everything. And it wasn't keeping the right time. And I thought, how odd, this fabulous institution, and they have a clock that doesn't keep the right time. And I mentioned to the librarian there, and she says, "Oh, that clock has never kept the right time." I wove it into the story. You know,
on you.
Yes.
Amazing. Now, Kathy, let's talk about Maui. You are living on Maui at the present time. Would you care to tell us what transpired in your experience on August the 3rd this year, and how you feel the fires were started?
It was August 8th. It was actually Lionsgate.
Oh, I beg your pardon?
Yes, August 8th. And the day before, I started feeling rolling energy in my head. And at first, I wasn't sure what that was about. And then the next morning, I was supposed to go up to upcountry, but there was fires in upcountry. And so a friend of mine called and said, let's go to Lahaina. And, you know, it's about 30 minutes from where I live. And, he said, well, you know, I know there's a favorite restaurant of yours in Lahaina. Let's go eat there. You know, I'll promise I'll treat. And I said, okay. And so we get off in our car. And as we're getting closer to Lahaina, I'm seeing, you know, along the ocean drive there, water spouts coming out of the water, and the wind is starting to pick up. And as soon as we get into Lahaina area, I mean, the wind is incredible. And all of a sudden, everything is being blocked off. We couldn't get to the main front, called the Front Street, which is on the Harbor Street, where all the restaurants and shops and everything were, which was a couple blocks over. No matter how we tried to get, we couldn't get in there. And all of our phones had stopped. We couldn't get internet. We couldn't get cell phone service. So nobody knew what was going on. And we didn't realize that there had been some fires in the morning up there, but they had put them out. But everything felt just a little too freaky up there. I almost got hit by a pole that came over, that fell down. And, you know, the winds were just, and I said, let's go over to the next town, Kanapali. And it was just as bad over there. They had all lost power too. You know, people in hotels were out by the swimming pool. The swimming pool looked like it had big waves, you know, from the wind. And there was no lights. They were bringing in generators just to run the elevators, you know. And there's no food, no lights, nothing, no electricity anywhere. And it just started to feel too funky to me. And I was starting to get that rolling energy feeling in my head again. And I said, let's get out of here. And, but the way back was blocked off. There was roadblocks because of, you know, fires, or they were afraid that poles would come down, but the poles were supposed to be de-electrified and turned off. So that didn't quite make sense, but he knew the long way around the island. So it took hours to get all the way around the island to get home again. And by the time we got home, it was we got there, Lahaina, about 10:30 in the morning, didn't get home till about 4:30 back. And that was when, you know, I think the fires started around 3 or so. And the front street was blocked off, and all the deaths and people got trapped there. And
you were lucky to get out, Kathy.
Yes, but I knew that it wasn't a normal fire even before a lot of other people did. Yes. You know, I didn't understand, and then, you know, I understood it was a land grab. You know, they had to get the old Hawaiian culture. All those people who had been in those houses for ages. So a lot of them were run down, but, you know, they've been handed down from generation to generation. And, you know, it's sort of picked and choose where the fire went. And yes. I knew it was a directed energy weapon. And so I got up in the middle of the night the next day, and it was just so clear in my head, you have to write about this. And so I put out a letter of my experience on Facebook, my Facebook page, and to a lot of my contact people and so forth, my list of people. I just sent it to everyone just so they kind of knew. And at the time I didn't say it, I just said it felt like manipulated energy. I didn't say it was a directed energy weapon, you know, because I didn't have any proof of that yet. And that letter seemed to go around the world, and I started being called by news people, you know, to give my impressions of what was happening in Lahaina. And as a result of it, I got involved in a local community investigation group here and was asked to start doing interviews with people on, you know, how they steered Doppler radar, and how to storms, how they manipulated weather exactly to points where they wanted to. And we're not talking about HARP. It was a much easier way to do it. And then I did investigations into finding out that Maui was home to the Space Force, Delta Space Force,
yes.
and energy weapons, and directed energy and lasers and everything else. And most people here had no clue because they kept such a low profile on this island. And we are also home to the, there's only 3 quantum computing centers in the world. And this one is run by the Air Force. It keeps it very low key. And the other 2, one is in White Sands, was that New Mexico, and on a military base. And the other one is in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, also
interesting little island, kept for another time, I think.
And this runs everything on top of Haleakala, the mountaintop on Maui, where there's space satellites and big, huge telescopes. I mean, where you can see 10,000 times higher than the human eye can see in deep space. And that's why we're home to this deep space, Delta Space Force, and the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron. You know, everybody just thought it was, you know, Coast Guard and National Guard and so forth like that.
Oh my
no.
God.
We're one of the biggest ones and nobody really knew until we started doing some investigation.
They will be seeing everything going on up there, Kathy.
I'm sure they will. I ran into somebody who worked there. He was wearing a Air Force military fatigue and he was in Starbucks and he had a patch on his sleeve. And I took a wild guess because it had the number 15 on it. I said, by any chance, are you with the 15 Space Surveillance Squadron? And he looked at me like, oh, how did you know that? And our drinks were late in coming. And I had an interesting 10-minute conversation with him.
Right.
About he worked at the computing center, the high performance computing, quantum computing center. He worked also on Haleakala. And I knew he wasn't going to, tell me the truth, because they don't do.
But expressions say everything.
I threw out certain things to him just to see what his reaction would be. Yeah.
Kathy, tell me about the children, please. What your understanding is of those lost children.
Well, the guy that looked behind the scenes with me, and when I had my near death, and I happened to be talking to him, and I said, everybody here is thinking, oh, those children were abducted or child trafficked or whatever. I said, can you just take a look and see, because he's been really accurate. And he goes, oh, well, this is interesting. Most of them were vaporized because of the energy. He said, but because he said some bodies will be found because they were actually burned from fire, not the directed rays of the weaponry. But he said this was interesting. He said, because when a person leaves their physical body, they take that energy with them into the next state. And when accidents like that happen so fast and the body is vaporized, there's no way to retrieve that energy. And he said mass confusion on an astral level happened. He said he saw legions, I don't want to say legions, but just beings of like angelic beings coming down to help with this mass evacuation of souls. He said some were ready to leave, some were not.
I think legions is a very good word. They talk about legions of light. You can have the angelic legions of light. Absolutely. What a job. Oh my goodness. Maybe in a way, it's a blessing it was instant for those souls. That's something to keep in mind, I guess, and be a little bit heartfelt about. But
a lot of children, thousands of children, because they were told to go home that day because of the fire. And some of the parents worked in other parts of the island.
They went home.
So they were home, not knowing, that this would be, something that, I mean, most of them never had. And there was no fire alerts that went off, no emergency alert systems, that all,
none of your phones worked. You had
roadblocks. You couldn't watch TV
wrong.
to find out what was going on. So they had no idea that they were actually in a very dire situation.
And I heard that they were blocking food from coming in to help those people.
Yeah, FEMA did some, at one point, when I was asked to do some interviews with some of the survivors, Lahaina was pretty much blocked off, by FEMA, because they had to go in there and decontaminate and get rid of any evidence or whatever, they do. And so in the next town over, Kaanapali, but you had to go past Lahaina on the freeway. And when I got to Kaanapali to do these interviews, I threw up 3 times.
Wow. I
had to go behind a truck and vomited 3 times. The energy was so intense and so toxic there that I told my people, I'm sorry, I'll do interviews with people, but I won't go back there.
Very, very sad. I'm very sorry that has happened to that beautiful, beautiful island, and to the sacredness of the sovereignty of Lahaina and all that it holds as well with the lineages.
Yes.
And we only hope that Hawaii gains its sovereignty, because I think that would be a beautiful thing.
Well, they have been, the Hawaiians were robbed from it,
Yes.
Their king sold them out as well, and so they really have they've been displaced, and some of these were the last bastions of a land that were still left over from the kingdom, the kings giving tracts of land to natives and generations passing them down. So, it was sort of like what better way to get rid of the problem so that they could rebuild. And I remember my friend, the timeline reader who talked about the vaporized souls, when I told him I was moving to Maui about 2.5 years ago, he said, well, don't you remember what I wrote in one of my books about Maui? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, go look. And so I did, and it said that in the future, because how he does is he looks at the timelines and he looks at all the threads, which are all possible futures, not probable, possible, and he looks at the one that has the most energy attached to it, and that's going to be the most probable future. I mean, things could change, but that most likely happens. And he said in the future that it looked like Maui would be the new Switzerland banking center of the world.
Oh, interesting.
And, but to do that, you have to clear out a lot of elements to make that into the Switzerland kind of French Riviera type of
Yes.
place that you want to be for the rich and famous. So, yeah, that's, so I can see they said, Lahaina, well, they won't probably start rebuilding for 10 years.
Wow.
That's enough to make people go move elsewhere, not come back. A lot of those people are just now getting to see what their properties look like. They couldn't unless they signed off with FEMA, for FEMA to clean them. And, they'll never rebuild. Most of them don't have the money to. So, it's, and insurance is really screwing them over too, on top of it.
As always. Kathy, we're coming to the end of our beautiful chat. As a final question, or a final answer to my question, before we hand it over to questions, if you're happy to do that from our lovely family, could you talk about today the state of play globally, and do you have any spiritual insights for these profoundly challenging times? How do you see today, and do you have any lovely insights to finish off on this segment, please?
No, this is just a weird and wacky world we live in. That's all I can say. And like I said, I've seen large spaceships, and I'm also good at remote viewing. And I don't think we've talked about remote viewing, have we?
There's so many more avenues we could go down, and I think we may have to have you on again, Kathy, because
okay,
if you're up for it. Yeah,
sure. It's getting, I get up like at 5 a.m. So it's getting close to my bedtime here.
Yeah. Gotta have your beauty sleep, darling.
No, it's all right. But no, I can't think of anything that comes to mind right now. But if you want to hear more about, some of my adventures and some of my insights, I would direct them to the Trinfinity8 website, Trinfinity8.com website, where you can click on the blog tab, and a lot of articles about things, even, the alien artifacts and things that I found in Mexico and so forth like that, and a lot of other adventures are there as well. So, I was doing that over the years. I haven't done as much in the last couple of years because I've been busy writing the books. So, and those books, by the way, my books can all be found on Amazon. They're in print, in Kindle, and in audio format, all three of them. And it's Stack's Library of Truth. So, if you get one, make sure you start with the first one and don't start with the second or third, because it's a continuing story. Or they can go to, like I said, the Trinfinity8.com website or the Ascension11.com website to find out about the technology that came out of the near-death experience. And that's pretty much kind of all I have to say right now.
That's lovely. That was the next. You've been answering the questions before I've been asking them, which often happens, and I love it. It was going to ask you where people could find you, or what you do, or more about you. So thank you for that.
Yes,
So,
or you can get me you can get there's also Stack's libraryoftruth.com website, or you can just friend me on Facebook, Kathy Forti, so you can find me there, or on LinkedIn or Twitter, or the whole host of all those places.
Thank you, Kathy. Right, let's look at the questions. So Andy, you've asked, I would love to know more about Trinfinity8 and Ascension11. Kathy has just suggested where you can go. Karen has put, I don't know whether you can see the chats, Kathy. Karen has put up, hi,
Hey,
Kathy.
Karen.
It's Karen here. I just wanted to say hi and give you a virtual hug. I'm loving your new hair color.
Good to see you again, Karen. It's been a while.
Does anyone else have a question for Kathy?
Yeah. So your people are from all over the world here, or what?
They are mostly New Zealand, mostly Kiwis, but we do have some from other places as well, which is lovely. We often have.
I have been to New Zealand. It is beautiful. Yes, I sheared a sheep.
Wow. We'll have to have you back, Kathy. It would be lovely to see you. That would have been an experience.
That's right. They gave me a little certificate too, I remember.
Lou has asked, this is a very good question. How do you see the ascension? Is that an individual selection process or a natural process where souls go up once they had completed their learning and clearing of karma?
Well, I think a lot of souls are going to make that transition when they pass from this lifetime to the fifth dimension. That's the kind of the ascension we're talking about. We're not talking about necessarily a beam me up Scotty type thing. What we will pass, and I think a lot of us have been here a long time, have gotten somewhat, a little complacent, that being on planet Earth. And I think that from all the things that are going on in the world right now, that it's pushing us to say that, it's not quite the place I remember it to be. Maybe it's time to move on and leave the younger souls to duke out their battles and learn their emotional stuff and all that. And so I think that will be a gradual one. I do know that fifth dimension Terra, fourth dimension was what fell during Atlantean times and during the upheavals. So we're going right from third to fifth, and fifth is Terra, and Terra is a whole different place. Everybody there kind of knows what everybody else is working on. So it's not a place where you can lie. It's just impossible. And we're not going to have all our gadgets, that's for sure. We're not going to have our heads in our phones and our iPads and so forth like that. And we'll still be working on issues and things like that. That will never end. It's a whole bit different. It's a different platform. And it also, at the same time, there'll be so much of an inundation of souls into fifth dimensional Terra that it will actually spur many of the people on the fifth dimension to start moving on as well, with all this influx of souls. It's sort of like open borders, but not as bad. And so that ascension process really will, like I said, once you pass, that's where this will take place, and you'll be led to go where you go. And all I'm going to say is, if you already know you don't want to come back to this dimension, don't go in the light.
Yes, exactly.
Wait for that still voice, to show you where you're supposed to be going.
I want to go home. So, I want to go back to source. You turn away from the tunnel of light, and you'll see the universe. Right. You'll see the whole
and if
universe.
Mom is there waving her little handkerchief, come here, Kathy, and go, no, Mom. Yeah. You're an illusion.
Yeah. Yeah. From Andy, could Kathy please speak more on the carrier wave into the subconscious? Are there certain frequencies as the 5 to 8 hertz, etc.?
Yes. that's why we use certain music, like the 528 hertz. There's 396, I believe. There was a number of them that we used in the Ascension11. But we did also use solfeggio tones in the Trinfinity8, because as what they showed me was that music opened the pathways. And, what is it? The last thing to go, the last sense to go when we die is our hearing, Yes, and it resonates. I mean, even if you're deaf, you still hear, you still hear things, your body feels that resonance and so forth. And so for what it does is it just opens the cells. It's sort of like, like a can opener, I guess. So yes, so music is definitely a quicker pathway into the cells, and if it's a particular frequency, fine. But that's why it says when you couple that with information, then you're feeding information in there along with it, and you're using the music as a opening.
Beautiful. Love it.
I hope that answered his question. Hi, Andy. I see you. Next question.
Andy also asks, does Kathy have a download or a message specific to our group, please?
Actually, no, I didn't even think about that.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
No, except, it just came in. Follow your truth.
Beautiful.
Simple as that. Follow your truth. Yeah.
We have.
Don't give your power away to, outside forces or, the age of gurus is gone. Now it's all, you are your guru, and listen to that and trust in that, and, use your own discernment from that. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful answer, Kathy. There's one last question that Lou has posed again. Where is the AI heading at the moment? Does it have to reach a peak before crashing for humanity to understand? Taken for granted, does have existed from a very, very long time already. I'm not quite understanding that last sentence.
Well, one thing I didn't say about the AI, which everyone is missing, is that apparently, third dimensional Earth was created, or Earth in general, all the dimensions on Earth, because it's 12 dimensions all within each other, sort of like a fractal, like those Russian nesting dolls. We're all, so one that affects one dimension will ultimately, if it's big enough, will have repercussions on another one. But human angelic souls, this dimension we're on right now, was made specifically for free will choice learning.
Yes.
And the minute you insert the AI element in, cloud-based, and where it can be interfered, you are nullifying free will. Now, as I understand it, human angelic souls are not compatible with AI devices, AI bodies, like robotic devices with consciousness and so forth in there. That's kind of where things, they don't talk about that part, but that's where they're headed. And apparently what I was shown was that this will become a problem in the future, where human angelic souls that want to learn on third dimensional plane will not be able to have that opportunity, because the compatibility will not be there. And so they lend their biophotonic light to this dimension as humans. And when that is retracted and they no longer come here because it doesn't make sense to come here anymore, this dimension will die out. And we have a couple hundred years before that will happen, but we're seeing what's already kind of happening now. So we have to, if we want to continue the learning process for all human souls, we have to really be careful about this whole AI thing.
I think if it's controlled in a way that it cannot override, it can be helpful. But if it's not controlled, it can certainly do a lot of harm.
Yes. Well, somebody will always be in control of it, and there's the rub, because
There's
where
the
it is, they'll
rub.
go, oh, we can control people,
Yeah.
yes. Oh, goody, 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 just like COVID, right? And so, yeah, it's, there's the opportunity, there's always going to be elements that will want to be able to control other factions of society and humanity. So that's human nature, unfortunately.
Kathy, I've absolutely loved this evening. It's been so lovely to connect with you again, and you have such insight, such wisdom, such an interesting life in all its aspects. Very humble lady, I've got to say. Very intelligent and very intelligently answered questions. And I'm tripping over my words, so maybe I'm not so intelligent after all. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know our soul family here would have loved to have spoken to you personally. So we're just going to have you back to talk about the Mexican artifacts and all sorts, aren't we?
All right.
But thank you so much. I hope things continue to improve on Maui. I hope your life is going to be everything you ask for and more, Kathy, and we'll look forward to catching up again. Thank you, Lee, for the opportunity to come on to 5D and Beyond. You've been listening to Kathy and Jude on A Cosmic Cuppa with Jude. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. And please remember, peace on earth. It starts with you. It starts with me. God bless and good night.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Mahalo. Thank you, everyone. Good night.